Sri Caitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Jaya Sri Caitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Jaya Sri Caitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Reading from Sri Chaitanya Caritamrita, Adi-lila, chapter 8, text number 27. Premera udaye hoy, premera vikara, sveda kampa pulakadi, gajadasrudhara. Premera udaye hoy, premera vikara, sveda kampa pulakadi, gajadasrudhara. Of love of Godhead, udaye, when there is an awakening, hoya, it becomes so. Premera, of love of Godhead, vikara, transformation, svedha, perspiration, kampa, trembling, pulaka adi, throbbing of the heart, gadgada, faltering, ashrudara, tears in the eyes. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. When one's transcendental loving service to the Lord is actually awakened, it generates transformations in the body, such as perspiration, trembling, throbbing of the heart, faltering of the voice, and tears in the eyes. Please repeat. When one's transcendental loving service to the Lord is actually awakened, it generates transformations in the body, such as perspiration, trembling, throbbing of the heart, faltering of the voice, and tears in the eyes. Purport. These bodily transformations are automatically manifested when one is actually situated in love of Godhead. One should not artificially imitate them. Our disease is desire for that which is material. Even while advancing in spiritual life, we want material acclaim. One must be free from this disease. Pure devotion must be anya-vilasita sunyam, without desire for anything material. Advanced devotees manifest many bodily transformations which are symptoms of ecstasy, but one should not imitate them to achieve cheap adoration from the public. When one actually attains the advanced stage, the ecstatic symptoms will appear automatically. One does not need to imitate them. I was born in the darkness of ignorance. My spiritual master has very kindly come, forced open my eyes with you towards light of transcendental knowledge. I offer my most respectful obeisances unto him. Mukam karoti vachalam pangum langhayate gurum yat kripatamaham vande Sri Gurum Dinataranam. By the grace of one spiritual master, even a blind man can see stars in the sky, a lame man can cross over mountains, and a dumb man can recite eloquent Vedic poetry. Before Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu left on his tour of South India, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya advised him to seek out the association of Ramananda Roy, who was the governor at that time of Madras, now known as Chennai. He had a very important administrative position as the governor of the state. So by the Lord's transcendental arrangement, the two did meet on the bank of the Godavari River in South India. And there's a wonderful description which we will read here in this Caitanya Caritamrita of their meeting. And when they met for the first time, Ramananda Roy was accompanied by many soldiers. Many Brahmins were chanting mantras. There were numerous musicians playing Shanai and other auspicious instruments. So it was quite a large entourage that Ramananda Roy was travelling with. And the two met and immediately recognised one another. Caitanya Mahaprabhu recognised his eternal associate, Ramananda Roy, and Ramananda Roy, of course, recognised Caitanya Mahaprabhu as Krishna himself. So there was a very touching and moving scene where the two were embracing one another and manifesting many of the ecstatic symptoms that we're reading about in this verse. Their bodies went into ecstasy and they were shedding profuse tears. They were rolling on the ground in ecstasy, embracing one another. And this was a cause of some astonishment to the many personalities accompanying the governor. Some were thinking, what's this sannyasi doing embracing a lower caste kayasta? Even though he has a very important position, still the sannyasi is embracing him and they're rolling on the ground and shedding tears of ecstasy. Similarly, they were thinking, what business does the sannyasi have to do with this? And so this was perplexing them, and the two exalted personalities realized this, and after some time of experiencing wonderful happiness in one another's company, Mahaprabhu said, look, let's meet again later on this evening and we can have talks about Krishna. So that they did. And of course those talks went on for several days and nights, and they comprise one of the most wonderful conversations in the history of Vaishnavism. It's known as the Roy Ramananda Samvad. Samvad means conversation. So wonderful discussions between the Lord and his one of his most intimate associates, Ramananda Roy. And Caitanya Mahaprabhu took the role of a student, and Ramananda Roy, on the Lord's order, took the role of teacher. And Mahaprabhu was asking questions, and Ramananda Roy was giving the answers. And essentially, the conversation centered on the topic, what is the most exalted engagement for any human being in this world. What should every jiva be actually doing when we get a human form of life? And Roy Ramananda started out explaining that the best situation for every person is to render service in the Varnashram institution for social and for spiritual orders of life. And in that way, please the Lord by performing his or her occupational duties. And of course, the conversation progressed up from that point to, and Mahaprabhu was continually saying, go on speaking, go on, but I think there is something more. And so gradually, Ramananda Roy was revealing more and more until, of course, it came to the pure unalloyed service of the inhabitants of Sri Vrindavan Dham, culminating in the pure service of the Braja milkmaids, the Vrindavan gopis towards Sri Krishna. So there is a term in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, Prakrita Sahajya. Prakrita means materialistic, and Sahajya means cheap and easy. That's what we want, right? Cheap and easy, yeah. But Krishna doesn't want to be taken cheaply, and he's not so easy to achieve, not so easy to gain entrance into the Lord's abode, Goloka Vrindavan, even Vaikuntha. But just like in this world, sometimes there may be a relationship breakup. We may be in a relationship, and either as lovers or friends or parental affection. But then at some point we decide to go away. We give up that person who we're in a relationship with and we go off. Either with somebody else or just we go off. But then after some time we come to our senses and we realise that person who I was in a relationship was actually the most wonderful person. And I don't know what madness overcame me, but so then we try to reconnect with that person. We reach out. But then that person who we've broken up with says, well, let's wait a minute here. You broke my heart when you went away. I'm not too sure about this. I really need to see some big commitment from you, some real show of sincerity and seriousness, because I'm not going to put myself through that again. So it's a little bit like us leaving the spiritual world, however long ago that was, unless of course you're a Nitya Siddha and you've come here to do some stupendous service on behalf of the divine couple. But for most of us, I'm not sure if we're in that category. I for one am certainly not. So we have the process of sadhana bhakti. Following rules and regulations to show Krishna, yes, we are actually sincere and serious. In ancient times, of course, there was a process whereby aspiring disciples would actually go and live in the ashram of their prospective gurus for 1 year, and each would have an opportunity to examine the character of one another. Disciple would examine the qualifications of the guru, and similarly the guru could examine the qualifications before awarding initiation to the disciple. So that arrangement has been there since time immemorial, and of course Srila Prabhupada introduced a similar where he would entrust that responsibility to his leaders in different temples in the world to recommend candidates for initiation after they had similarly been scrutinized by their temple authorities that yes, this person is serious, they're sincere, I'll recommend them to Srila Prabhupada for initiation. So in order to achieve anything worthwhile in life, of course, we have to perform some austerities. This is not a word that I was familiar with before I joined the Krishna consciousness movement. What is austere? What is austerity? But we soon came to know something of the meaning of those important words. And sometimes it would be pointed out, so-and-so prabhu is very austere, or so-and-so is performing austerities. So a little austerity, of course, we're being asked to follow very basic rules and regulations that any civilized human being can follow, and chant a minimum number of rounds of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, which anyone can do in 2 to 3 hours, which leaves a large amount of the day and night still for other activities. Hopefully some other services in there as well. So, in the history of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, there have been, and still are, many persons who want, actually, they're aspiring devotees of Krishna. And Srila Prabhupada may have said one time that the Sahatyas are actually more advanced spiritually than the Mayavadis, because at least the Sahatyas they're attracted to Krishna and they're trying to develop their love for Krishna, whereas Mayavadis are envious of Krishna. But the problem is that these Sahatyas, there is sensual weakness and there's often philosophical weakness as well. So they handicap one on the spiritual path. Krishna is known as Pavitram. Param Brahma, Param Dhamma, Pavitram, Paramam Bhavam, Purusham Shashvatam Divyam Adidevam Ajam Vibhum. Arjuna came to that realization that his friend, Lord Sri Krishna, was in fact the Supreme Personality of Godhead, just prior to the great battle of Kurukshetra. And he offered this beautiful prayer: "My Lord, you are the Supreme Brahman. You are the Supreme Abode and Purifier, the original divine personality, the purest. All the great sages such as Asita, Devala, Vyasa, Narad have proclaimed this about you. And now you, my Lord, are declaring it plainly to me." So in order to approach the Supreme Pure, one has to, of course, be pure oneself. There is protocol in practically everything we do in life. There are certain protocols one has to follow. We cannot even fly out of the country of our birth at the moment unless we have a valid reason. Can't fly in, can't even sometimes go from one city to another. So these protocols are there in spiritual life as well. And if one actually wants to achieve residence in the Lord's abode, then one should be very enthusiastic to follow them. So our acharyas have all had to fight very strenuously to maintain or reintroduce the pure teachings of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu over the course of the centuries. It's a little like anyone who's a gardener or a farmer knows. Before you sow seeds in the ground, you have to prepare the soil. You have to get rid of all the rubbish things in the soil. You also have to fertilize the soil, make sure it's got sufficient moisture, and especially you have to get rid of the weeds. Otherwise they'll grow up and they'll choke. In our case, of course, the most mysterious, esoteric phenomenon at the time of initiation, the spiritual master plants the bhakti lata bij in the heart of the disciple, the seed of devotion. Initiate means to begin, so that is the start. And by the careful process of hearing and chanting on a daily basis and rendering service, the aspiring devotee waters that seed, and the fruits are, of course, ecstatic love of Godhead, as again we've just read about some of the symptoms in this verse. So, but before that comes to pass, of course, often our acharyas have had to cut down the numerous misconceptions that are existing there about spiritual life. Depending on the time and the place and the circumstance, kala, patra, desha, there are different situations all over the world in different countries and cultures. So our acharyas do that. They are empowered by Krishna to bring people out of the darkness of ignorance and to defeat their different misconceptions. And they do that in very wonderful ways. For example, on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, 26 Second Avenue, one young man protested or challenged Srila Prabhupada, Swamiji, you say that chanting Hare Krishna is better than LSD, but how can you say that when you yourself have not personally used LSD? It's a fair question, yes? Prabhupada responded, it is true that I have not personally used this LSD habit, but all my disciples have. And they've told me that chanting Hare Krishna is better than LSD. Brilliant logic, yeah? So that was a misconception, that somehow or other one could attain a spiritual realization by taking some hallucinogenic substance. So similarly, there is, in the Western world, of course, Prabhupada wrote his own second pranam mantra, Nirvisesha Sunyavadi Paskatya Desitarane, concludes with those words. The Western world, which is filled of impersonalism and voidism, and we can add atheism and lots of other isms as well. So Prabhupada was doing his best to introduce the pure, sublime teachings of Caitanya Mahaprabhu in cultures which were permeated by atheism and voidism. And even before that, of course, people were addicted to so many sinful acts which check or block one's realization, such as meat eating. The famous verses there in Srimad Bhagavatam, which contains the word Pashugnat. Pashugnat means two things, killer of animals and killer of one's own soul. So it's not possible to achieve spiritual realization if one is still killing animals, and ultimately one is committing a type of suicide spiritually oneself. So Prabhupada had to cut away all these toxic weeds of impersonalism, voidism, gross materialism. And he did that in a very effective and charming and wonderful way. And similarly, in previous ages, previous centuries, of course, our great acharyas, like Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he also had huge challenges in the 17th century he had to overcome. And Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, during their time, also there were many misconceptions. Actually, in Bengal, during the time of Srila Bhaktivinoda, many people had, especially members of the higher castes, had been turned away from Gaudiya Vaishnavism because of the unethical and immoral character and practices of many of these Sahajiya groups. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he identified 13 prominent ones. And he wrote about them extensively in his books, especially in Harinam Chintamani. He wrote extensively, and also the Jaiva Dharma. And he defeated all of their bogus philosophies that they had introduced into the teachings of Mahaprabhu. And his son, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, also in his very important book, Vaishnava K, he identified, and such as Anitya Vaibhav, the hankering for material success, as Prabhupada has also mentioned here, without desire for anything material. That's actually what we want. And similarly, Kami Nira Karma, illicit sex passed off as transcendence. So these are prominent anomalies in practically, or at least some of the prominent Sahajya groups. And Mayavad also, philosophical speculation which undercuts the personal nature of God. So of course, the pure teachings of Mahaprabhu, as inculcated by Rupa Goswami and the other Goswamis, give us information that there are eternal associates of the Supreme Lord in his abode, and they are known as Ragatmika Bhaktas, Ragatmika devotees, and they maintain their positions eternally. Like Mother Jasoda, Nanda Maharaj, Srimati Radharani and her principal gopi assistants, similarly the cowherd boys. There are group leaders amongst the gopis, Yudheshwaris, such as Sri Radha and Chandravali, and others as well. So these are all Ragatmika devotees, and no one can ever become Mother Jasoda or Nanda Maharaj. Their positions are eternally theirs. But there are also Raganuga Bhaktas. They are great devotees of the Lord who are liberated souls, and they are eternally serving one of the Ragatmika Bhaktas. They're very happy to be, as Mahaprabhu has said, Gopi Bhatu Parakamala Dasa Dasa Anudasa, that I am the servant of the servant of the servant, so many times removed. The servant of Krishna, the Lord of the Gopis. So there are many eternally liberated Raganuga Bhaktas, and we are encouraged to take shelter of one of those. And of course in our line, our beloved Srila Prabhupada, we're taking shelter of him and his instructions, very kindly left behind for all of us to follow. And of course we see devotees are becoming very advanced in the Krishna consciousness movement. We had very nice, though somewhat sad, memorial service for His Grace Pankajangari Prabhu. And so many devotees wanted to speak out of love and affection, so we didn't get a chance to speak, though we had a few things we wanted to share. But that was okay, because we were more than happy to hear, especially the long-term residents of Sri Mayapur Chandaradaya Mandir, who knew him better than some of us. But there was one wonderful pastime, which Indraduna Maharaj shared with me on a couple of occasions. I wasn't there. Perhaps some of the devotees who were here on that day were in Poland when Maharaj invited, as he regularly did, his senior godbrothers and godsisters to the Polish tour each year. And on this particular year, Pankajangari Prabhu was one of the senior godbrethren to be invited. So he hadn't been out of India for some years, hadn't been out of Mayapur. So he came, and on the first day he was there, he was astonished to see the incredible preaching that was going on in Poland. This was at the Polish Woodstock, big festival, 1 million approximately young people, mainly, but many people from all over Europe and the world. Rathayatra festivals, Lord Jagannath going up and down within the festival grounds, ecstatic kirtans for hours, way past midnight every night, with all of the most ecstatic, some of the most ecstatic kirtanias in ISKCON. Madhava Sri Prahlad, Govinda Maharaj, Bharahari, Indraduna Maharaj. So Prabhu was asked to give, Pankajangari was asked to give the class the next morning after witnessing all this. And devotees were eager there to hear Srimad Bhagavatam class from him. And he managed to get through singing Jai Radha Madhava and perhaps reciting. But as he was about to speak, he just completely emotionally broke down in ecstasy and profuse tears. And he had to apologize. He said, look, I'm just overwhelmed. I haven't been out of India. This is just all the mercy of Lord Nityananda Prabhu in the Western world. This is just... And he literally got up off the seat and walked to his caravan, and Indraduna Maharaj went after him, the devotees went after him. Prabhu, are you okay? You know? And he said, yeah, I'm just, this is just overwhelming. This is just too much. So, but that can't be imitated, but that's genuine feelings when the heart becomes very soft. We know that Krishna Bhakti is a heart melting process, whereas other systems of yoga, with all due respect, can make the heart actually harder. And we don't want hard hearts. Hard-hearted person is not very attractive. A soft-hearted person whose heart has been melted by decades of chanting Hare Krishna and worshipping Krishna, hearing about Krishna, they're very attractive personalities. So I wanted to tell the story, it's a very famous story, it's a whole chapter in the autobiography of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur called The Chastisement of Bishikishen. And it occurred in the year 1871. And Bishikishen was a member of one of the 13 principal upper sampradayas of the Prakrita Sahajas. And it was a big problem for the British who were ruling India, especially in the state of Orissa at that time. And the commissioner, he was the English district commissioner, one Mr. Ravenshaw. Srila Bhaktivinoda and his family had only recently moved to Jagannath Puri to take up, the Thakur took up the position as district magistrate. So Mr. Ravenshaw asked the Thakur to take responsibility for dealing with this person, Bishikishenam. He took it upon himself to investigate what was going on. Bishikishena was a member of the Ativadi Sampradaya, and Ativadi means too great. And actually the Ativadis had been around in Orissa since the time of Mahaprabhu. And their founder, so-called, was one Jagannath Das, who was an associate of Mahaprabhu, contemporary. But, and he had some conversations with Mahaprabhu, but he had his own ideas about spiritual life. Mahaprabhu encouraged him to take shelter of Namacharya Haridas Thakur, but he wasn't prepared to do that. So in the end, Mahaprabhu had to dismiss him from his inner circle, not that he was ever in the inner circle, but had to neglect him. And he did that by saying in a slightly facetious way that you are too great. But this Jagannath Das took that as a compliment, so he went off and did his own thing, as we sometimes say. So the Ativadis, they became quite prominent in Orissa. It's thought that they had approximately 15,000 followers, and they had something like a brotherhood similar to the Freemasons, but they were addicted to smoking ganja and opium. And this one, Bishikishen, he even became more degraded, where he was masquerading as an incarnation of Mahavishnu. And And there was some immoral dealings also going on, corrupting women into illicit affairs and so on. So it was a big problem. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he took it upon himself and he did thorough investigations and actually went and had conversations. And eventually he went and arrested Vishikashena with many, many constables, and the deputy chief of police, or the chief of police also came, and so it was a very dramatic prosecution which went for many days. And actually during that time, Bhaktivinoda Thakur's youngest daughter, Kadambini, she got gravely ill. The Thakur himself got chest pains on the last day of the court hearing. Srimati, the Thakur's wonderful wife, Bhagavati Devi, she appealed to her husband, please just release him. He's going to kill our whole family. He had mystic powers, no doubt. He was a yogi. He had mystic powers, and he was threatening the government that I will drive the Englishman from India. And he even promised Bhaktivinoda Thakur a big position in the new government of Orissa. But Thakur Bhaktivinoda, he was not impressed by any of the mystic powers, even his own family members getting ill. He had firm faith that Krishna would take care of this rascal, and of course that's exactly what happened. Even though there was 1,000 followers of Vishikashena protesting outside the courthouse every day, Thakur Bhaktivinoda was not concerned. And of course, on the final day of the trial, he was convicted of conspiracy, which is a very heavy crime, conspiring against the government, and he was sentenced to 18 months imprisonment with hard labour. And as he was being taken from the court, the district medical officer, one Dr. Walters, he jumped on the back of Vishikashena and with a large pair of shears cut off all his hair. And immediately Vishikashena collapsed, and he had to be actually removed from the courthouse on a stretcher and taken to prison. Because this Dr. Walters had lived in India for a long time, and even though he was an Englishman, he understood that yogis keep their powers in their hair. And immediately, whatever mystic powers he had left his body when his hair was cut off. And of course it didn't get any better for Vishikashena after that time, because it's said that he took poison in prison after some months and passed away. So this is just, of course, one example of our acharyas having to do the needful in the way of preserving Mahaprabhu's pure teachings, and of course teaching them to persons who are serious and sincere. So I'll stop there. Thank you. Any questions, comments, or corrections, please? Do we have a microphone this morning? May not have any questions now. Anyone have a comment or a question? Krishna Rupa, I think you've got a comment.
Just to thank you for my comment is just to thank you for the wonderful class.
Thank you. Thanks for coming. Always privilege, always nervous tension sitting here in front of my revered senior God sisters and God brothers and all the devotees. All right, so if there isn't anything, thank you very much. Jai Shri Caitanya Caritamrita ki.